And now I'm going to introduce the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Virginia Berry. She's been a great leader for me personally, but for our staff and our whole state. She did work for the university, Plymouth State University, prior to coming to the Department of Education and running that. She was also a teacher and a school leader.
So New Hampshire, if anyone's been attending recently this summer, the various events that have been going on, we've had so many wonderful events for educators to recognize the absolute essential work that you do for our students. And so in New Hampshire, over the last, I want to say, number of years, we have really, I think, led the country on several levels. You know that we are looking at performance-based assessment. And if you're not familiar with performance-based assessment, what it really says in a synopsis, it says that tests are not how we measure children. It's a way, but we're looking at how children can demonstrate what they know and help us to better understand how we can be effective teachers and learners. But tied to that is a growing change of thinking in the state of New Hampshire, and that is that we really want to look at whole children. That's really important, that it's not grades and grade levels and grades, but it's really about providing an environment where students can grow as whole people. The current Secretary of Education, John King, I think is an amazing person in that he's recognizing that the socio-emotional health of children is what really helps our society continue and to be successful. And New Hampshire is leading in this area. So with that said, I really want to thank Santina. She is, I say this all the time, one of the best bureau chiefs across the country, because even though her area is, by designation special education, she has really opened up the doors for all of us, including the department, to look at students in a much more holistic way. So it's very, very exciting. And Mary, I adore Mary because she believes in all the things I believe in, and that is that we are all important and children matters. The whole entire staff is just great. There's nothing that I ask them to see if we could do that they don't find a way to do that. And I'm sure for many of you, those doors as they continue to open are really critical. So let me just, from a commissioner's perspective, I know you have a wonderful speaker today, and I'd like to set the stage, and that is, this is a very, very complex time, as you all know, in our society. But let me focus for a minute on the state of New Hampshire. On a weekly basis, daily basis, even throughout this summer, we get calls from parents. Parents today are living in fear. They really are. Schools have truly become, for many children, a safe haven. The place where when they walk through the door, they can feel important and they can feel safe. Not just physically, but also in an emotional, nutritional, the kinds of things that we want for all children in our country. And look around. There was a time I experienced coming from public education where superintendents and principals are like, look, you people are laying too much on us. We can't do any more than we're doing. But I am really proud to say that today, working very closely with our superintendents, with our principals, and all of you, we are seeing a change of how we look at our schools. And this is really important to our children and families. We live today in a society of intense violence. I was just saying, talking with people from Merrimack, driving to work. I live an hour north, and I listen to NPR, and I feel really like I don't want to listen anymore. Every morning, there's another violent act happening, not only in our own country, but across the world. How does that translate to children? We know we live in a society where media exposure, even for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, so kids are hearing, seeing, and feeling the kinds of things. So when they walk through the door in the morning, and you're there to support them and believe in their future, that is absolutely essential. So you will leave that legacy for all the work that you do. Our challenges related to race and ethnicity, there's never really been a time in this country. People will say, well, we've been through this before. No, we have never been through what we are experiencing in this nation right now. And we have the responsibility as professional educators to ensure that the children that are going through our society have the support that they need to recognize how critical universal acceptance is of all people. Our discussions on terrorism, you know that that's the #1 ranked concern of people across the nation. Our opioid crisis in our own state, we've spent a year talking about it. I hope that we're going to see a lot more action. I will say that from a preventative standpoint, we've had limited funding as a state, and this is going to take a political position here. But as commissioner, I will share a little story. When Governor Hassan and Mary was there, first introduced that the state was going to really focus on opioids, the crisis in our state, the press were there. I wasn't invited. Were you invited, Mary? Well, we just came, right? The first question, yeah, no, isn't that fascinating? But this is what blows my mind, because the first question, every newspaper in the state of New Hampshire and MUR and another radio station was there, the first question they asked was, Governor Hassan, what's being done in prevention, right? And Mary was sitting over on the right. She looked at me, I looked at her, and the governor looked at me, and she said, oh, Commissioner Barry's here, she'll talk about that. Sadly, I didn't have a whole lot to talk about because we weren't engaged. Following that meeting, professional educators were invited to be part of how do we work on this opioid crisis. By far, the most critical element is prevention. So think about that. So in our country right now, we have concerns about law enforcement. So for most of the people in this room growing up, even the very younger people, law enforcement held a very special place in our country because it was really focused on law and order. And today, think about it. Think about the people that are responsible for law enforcement and how our society is responding. It all goes back to fear. We have many fears in our country right now, and as we work with children, youth, our responsibility is to help them understand from an educational standpoint how they can be the problem solvers for a nation that has many problems at this time. In New Hampshire, in the Youth Risk Survey, 9% of children in the state of New Hampshire are dealing with parents that are incarcerated. Now, I, sadly, but in a good note, part of my job is to visit corrections. I visit the corrections, the Granite State, and also the women's prison. And it's a sad commentary. How many kids are faced with this kind of issue? I was recently in a school district, which I won't name, in a kindergarten classroom, a first-year teacher, and she had the kids in the traditional circle after they had made introductions, and she said, well, why don't we just talk about how it was getting ready for school this morning? And the second child said, well, I didn't really have anybody at home because my mother's in jail and my father was killed by a gun. And the teacher, young teacher, sat there, and then as we went through the classroom, several students indicated that they lived with their grandparents or that they were in foster care. At the end of the session, the teacher was just so shook up by this. She never expected in this particular community. So their issues are out there. 31% of our kids in New Hampshire, based on the YRB, are dealing with substance abuse misuse at home. And I can tell you, I know Mary has many stories, I can tell you stories that would shock you. 24% of our students are going hungry. And the thing that fascinates me is if you do listen to public radio, you know, like 1 minute they're telling us, you know, we're the third most fourth, and I think we're on fifth now, economically stable state, and yet we reject the fact that we have kids hungry all over our state. And I want to thank those school districts that opened their doors this summer to make sure that in the libraries and various places in town, kids at least had a lunch. But there was rejection of that in several communities. So acceptance, as you all know, part of these issues that you'll be talking about is where we start. We have to recognize the demographics in our own state, but most important, we need to be there for the children. 15% of students responding to the YRB have considered suicide. But I hate statistics, but I know they do really make a point. But the reality of it is that all of you are working really hard. Your attitude, your commitment, and your passion is very diffusive to other educators. Because I have a theory that for many educators, given the way our pre-service programs work and our leadership programs, I can tell you, coming from the university system, it is a very rare day that any real time is spent looking at child development and looking at the impact of the kinds of variables, factors that children live with in our society. And so every day, the work that you do has an impact on another educator who may be fearful, who may say, I don't know if I want to deal with that. So the more that we come together and we collaborate and we partner and we talk about these things and we help our parents to know that we're there for their children, the most significant thing is their lives, the economic development impact that we have in quality education programs. One of the biggest factors that we're dealing with in the state of New Hampshire, which is why economically we are starting to fall, is that young people aren't staying there. So if you come from a quality school, if you come from a school that cares about you as an individual, if you come from a place that helps you grow into a better person, you don't forget that. So every day, the work that you're doing is having an enormous impact on every element of humankind, our economic development, and I hope that one day all of us can say New Hampshire is the best place to live in this country. So thank you very much for all your great work.